Imagine being a child standing in the middle of two entirely different worlds. On one side, a father who trusted the school system, degrees, and a steady paycheck to protect the family's future. On the other side, a man with no college diploma who taught by doing, who used businesses, properties, and creative deals to build freedom. This is the world Robert Kiyosaki describes in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, a world where two paternal voices offered radically different advice about what mattered most in life and money. The contrast was not merely philosophical, it was lived, practical, and relentless. One father, the poor dad, prized education, credentials, and a respectable job. He believed safety followed from obedience to institutions. The other, the rich dad, prized ownership, financial literacy, and the ability to create income streams that did not depend on trading time for money. These two teachings shaped Robert's young mind and became the scaffolding of his views on wealth, risk, and freedom. As a child, he watched two men make decisions and observed the consequences. One man worried about bills despite a stable job and reputable standing in the community. The other man navigated markets and opportunities with a kind of pragmatic intelligence that converted small advantages into durable security. The lessons were not delivered as formal lectures. They came through example, conflict, and repeated choices. When Robert was 9 years old, he and his friend Mike were obsessed with a single bright idea: make money. Their experiments were childish and earnest, collecting discarded toothpaste tubes, melting metal, and imagining they had discovered a mint. When his poor dad found out, the response was blunt and reasonable. Study hard, get good grades, find a reliable job. That logic had gotten poor dad through graduate studies and into a respected government position, and from his vantage point, it promised stability. But to Robert, the explanation felt incomplete. It told him how to be respectable, but not how to be free. So he asked his friend Mike's father, the rich dad, "How do we get rich?" Rich Dad did not offer a formula or hand them money. He taught by experience. He hired the boys to work in his convenience store, sweeping floors and stocking shelves for a paltry 10 cents an hour. When Robert realized he was working hard for almost nothing, he complained, and Rich Dad smiled. "Now you see the trap," he said. "Most people work for money. They believe a bigger paycheck solves their problems, but fear of not having money and greed for more of it keep them trapped in a rat race. The trick is to make money work for you." This lesson reframed everything. Instead of idolizing a paycheck, Robert learned to study cash flow, assets, and systems that could generate income independent of his day-to-day labor. He learned that an education could be the beginning of security, but not the whole of it. Over time, the contrast between his two mentors crystallized into a series of foundational truths. Poor Dad, for all his intelligence and moral clarity, struggled with money because he followed a path that rewarded credentials but left him exposed to mounting expenses and liabilities. He treated his home as his biggest asset, invested in prestige and stability, and trusted retirement plans and benefits as the bulwark against insecurity. Rich Dad, in contrast, taught him to see assets as things that put money in your pocket, and liabilities as things that take money out. A house, Rich Dad argued, often behaves like a liability if it requires continual outflows in mortgage, taxes, and maintenance without producing positive cash flow. A rental property, a business that earns profits, or a portfolio of income-producing investments are assets because they expand your options, create recurring cash flow, and can be reinvested to produce more assets. That distinction, asset versus liability, seems simple, but it rearranges priorities. People may earn six-figure salaries, yet remain financially squeezed because they buy liabilities that masquerade as status. The wealthy, by contrast, prioritize acquiring assets that generate income and compound over time. Rich Dad generalized other rules as well. He emphasized reading financial statements the way a mechanic reads engine diagrams. A balance sheet and a cash flow statement reveal whether a purchase or investment will nourish or starve your finances. Most people are trained to read income statements only insofar as their salary appears there. They rarely learn how assets accumulate value on the balance sheet. Learning to read those documents turns opaque promises into measurable forecasts and transforms vague aspiration into calculable decisions. That education is not academic ornamentation. It is a practical survival skill in economies where ownership and cash flow determine long-term freedom. Another lesson was to work to learn, not merely to earn. Poor Dad preached specialization and credentials. Become an expert, get a secure job, and climb the ladder. Rich Dad urged versatility and skill acquisition. Sales, marketing, negotiations, accounting, and leadership. These are durable skills that allow someone to start a business, evaluate investments, and negotiate better deals. When you can sell, you can move products. When you can manage, you can multiply people's efforts. When you can read numbers, you can spot good bargains. Taken together, skills create optionality. Taxes and legal structures were part of Rich Dad's classroom too. He explained that tax codes and corporate laws are not neutral forces. They are levers people can use or ignore. Employees often accept tax as a fixed cost, while business owners and investors find legal ways to structure cash flows so more money is available for reinvestment. Understanding these mechanisms doesn't imply evasion. It implies literacy and strategy, choosing the structures that protect income and allow compound growth. Rich Dad's point was clear. The rules of the game exist, learn them, and play intelligently. Perhaps the most philosophical teaching was the idea that the wealthy invent money. That is not literal printing of currency, but the capacity to create value where others see cost. Whether through spotting a neglected property that can be renovated, recognizing a business underserved by local customers, or leveraging a network to create a profitable partnership, the financially literate see possibilities. This is not blind optimism, but trained observation. The ability to evaluate risk, detect inefficiencies, and transform them into revenue streams. Fear and greed are the twin emotions that sabotage most people. Fear keeps them glued to a job they dislike. Greed pushes them into debt to buy status. Rich Dad taught Robert to manage those emotions, to use courage to look for opportunity, and discipline to avoid consumption that undermines future freedom. The psychology of money matters as much as math. Robert learned practical lessons through real experiments. Small failures and modest wins taught him more than tidy hypotheticals. One project involved buying a dilapidated property, renovating it with sweat and care, and converting it into a modest rental that produced steady cash flow. The profit was less interesting than the experience. Negotiating with owners, organizing contractors, modeling costs, and managing tenants. Those procedural skills became repeatable advantages. Every time a person converts a learning episode into a replicable process, their competence grows and their exposure to risk diminishes. Rich Dad also taught the importance of systems and leverage. Wealth scales not by working more hours, but by building systems, teams, processes, financial arrangements that produce returns without continuous personal input. A small business with replicable operations, a rental portfolio managed by a team, or an investment strategy that automatically reinvests dividends create leverage. That leverage produces return on return, and compounding becomes the engine of exponential growth. Another pragmatic rule was to start small and learn fast. Not everyone can buy prime real estate or launch a venture with large capital. But many tools exist: micro-investing, small online businesses, freelancing, partnerships that lower entry costs and provide laboratories for experimentation. The point is to create a portfolio of experience as well as assets. A steady progression of micro-wins builds confidence, knowledge, and the ability to pursue larger opportunities. Rich Dad's teachings are not immune to critique. Observers point out that market conditions, regional housing prices, access to capital, and systemic inequalities shape what opportunities are realistic. Those critiques are valid, reminders that principles must be adapted to context. The core idea, the importance of financial education and asset focus, remains portable. How that principle is applied will differ depending on someone's environment. For some people, the path to building assets begins with community investment, cooperative enterprises, or educational ventures rather than rental property. The philosophical heart of Rich Dad Poor Dad is the democratization of financial literacy. Equip people with the language and tools to see money as a system they can influence rather than a fate imposed upon them. To make the book's counsel practical, Rich Dad offered concrete behaviors. Track cash flow rigorously. Record every inflow and outflow and categorize them by asset or liability. When patterns become visible, they can be changed. Cut back on liabilities that provide status but no income, and reallocate funds to small assets that produce cash flow. Learn basic accounting terms: cash flow, equity, depreciation, liability, because terminology is a tool for clarity. Another rule is to treat setbacks as tuition. Financial learning costs time and sometimes money. Mistakes are painful but informative. A bad investment becomes a lesson in due diligence, risk assessment, or partner selection. Over time, the cost of mistakes outweighs the durability of judgment they instill. That mindset, seeing failure as a form of investment in competence, reduces shame and fosters growth. Mentorship matters. Observing or partnering with someone experienced shortens the learning curve and reduces